Hello, and welcome back to another CodingBytes speedrun with me, Vince. Today, we're going to be continuing our journey through the Java REPL.it, and we're going to be tackling some problems involving for loops. So, let's get started. So, as you can see, I'm right now on problem 19, and we're going to be going from here to problem 24 today, which tackles the first series of problems involving for loops. So for our first problem, we get our input as an integer called end, and we want to write a for loop that prints out all the numbers starting at 1 and ending at the input inclusive. The numbers printed should all be on the same line, separated by a space. So first we got to ask ourselves, what's a for loop? And a for loop in Java looks something like this. For int I equals 0, I is less than length, I plus plus. And what this is going to do is it's going to do some code here. So at the very start, we're setting I to 0. And then every time we loop over the for loop, we're checking if I is less than whatever number this is, or this is more or less our exit condition. While this is true, the for loop will continue looping, otherwise it will exit the loop. And finally, after each iteration or loop, loop, we do something over here. So in this case, we're adding 1 to I. So if you don't know what plus plus means, this is shorthand for I equals I plus 1. Otherwise, plus plus. So what we want, how are we going to do this problem? So we get our numbers start at 1, so we actually want to set this to 1, and we want to end at the input inclusive. So we can set this to end. And yeah, so it wants us to print all of the numbers on the same line separated by a space. So this loop right now will loop through every index from 1 to just before end. Actually, we can just make this end. So when I equals end, it will run the loop one last time to print out the last number. So now we just need to print the index. So system.out.print, which prints the whatever is inside these opening and closing brackets, and then we can put I plus and then a space, and this will print I and then a space on the same line. Note, we're not using println anymore because we don't need to print it on a new line every time. So if we run this code, okay, so let's just test it for this first input, which is 5. And as you can see, it outputs 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if we test it for the second input, which is 10, and wait for the code, yep, so 10, as you can see, it puts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And if we put -5, if we put our input as -5, it should print nothing, which is correct because we should have no output because we're trying to start at 1 and we're ending at this input, but if the input is less than 1, it just means the code shouldn't run. So if we run this code now, we should see that it is working. So that is your first for loop problem in Java. So just wait for this one to finish and we'll move on to the next problem. Right. So what's our next problem? So we want to write a for loop that will print out the numbers starting at 1 and ending at twice the end number exclusive. Each number should be on the same line, separated by a space. So this is very similar to the previous problem, so we'll copy the previous problem's code. And there are 2 edits we need to make. First, we need to end at twice the end number. How do we do this? We can simply say end multiplied by 2. And if you don't know what the asterisk means you have to multiply the numbers. So this will multiply n by 2. The second change we need to make is that it's excluding this number. So instead of less than or equals, we need to use simply the less than sign. So it will print every number except for this n number divided by 2. They say it's starting at 1, but actually the first number is 0. So I'm going to change this 1 to a 0. And now let's test this code. So if we run this code, wait. And okay, so we have in, let's put 5. And as you can see, it prints 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, which is the expected output. Because it should end at 10, because 10 is double 5. So if we run this code again, put 10 in, let's test if that works. As you can see, it's also working correctly. So finally, let's test it for -5, which should result in no output, because -5 is less than 0. And we also receive no output. So our code is working perfectly, and it should pass all these tests correctly. Let's just wait and see, because maybe I've made a mistake. Okay, there we go. So let's move on to the next problem. So we get, instead of an integer, we get a string this time as our input. And we want to write a for loop that loops through every character of a word and prints out each character on a separate line. Okay, so how do we loop through this word? Well, to get every character at every position, we're going to write a for loop that starts at 0 and ends at the length of the string, -1. So word.length I++. So this will loop over our word, all of the indexes of the characters in our word. And now to get the character at a certain index in a string, we need to use the method char@. So word.char@, I will return us the character at this index I. So, and because I is continually increasing by 1, this will loop through all of the characters in the word. Finally, we want to print each character and on a separate line. So this time we're going to use system.out.println, which prints it on a new line, and then we're going to print the character. So if we run this code and we put hello in, as you can see, it prints hello on each new line. Let's test it for Zimbabwe. Oh. And I think the code's working satisfactorily, and so we've solved this problem. Let's just run all of the tests, but we should see that it's working. And there we go. So on to the next problem. So we're writing a for loop that prints out every other letter in a string starting with the first letter. And so they should all be printed on one line with no space in between. So again, we're going to copy the code from the previous problem because this problem is extremely similar. And there are two changes we need to make. First of all, we're printing out every other letter. So how do we print every other letter? We're going to add 2 to the index instead of 1 each time, which makes it jump letters. So we can say I plus equals 2 instead of I plus plus, which this time we'll add 2 to the letter. Next, the other change is that they wanted us to print all of the letters on one line with no spaces in between. So instead of println, we're going to use print. And if we run this code and we input hello, as you can see, it puts the correct output, HLO, because it skips over E and the other L, which have because it's printing every other letter. So if we run this code and put this input, so code very well, it also gives the correct output. So we've solved that problem successfully. So let's wait for the tests to run. And as you can see, they're all correct. So on to the fifth problem. We want to write, we're getting a word and we want to write a for loop that loops through every letter of the input and prints out just the vowels. Okay, so first let's create a for loop that loops through every letter of the input. So that's for in I equals 0, I is less than word dot length, I plus plus. So this will loop over every letter. Now we want to get the character at this position. So we can say char character is equal to word dot charat, which gets the character at this index, and inside those brackets we can put I. Next, we want to check if this letter is a vowel. So how do we do that? We need to check if character is equal to A, E, I, O, or U, which are the vowels in the English language. So if, and brackets, if you'll remember the if statement from our previous speedrun, if character is equal to A, or, and this is the symbol for or in Java, so if either of these two statements are true, it will run the if statement, or character equals E, or character equals I, or character equals O, or oh sorry, I'm putting ors, coding too much Python, or character equals U. Okay, so if it's any of the vowels, which we're checking for there, we want to print out character. So we can simply say print system dot out dot print character, and this should work. So if we run this and we put howdy ho as the input, as you can see, it just gets the vowels. And we could submit this code, but I also want to introduce to you a new conditional statement which I messed up in the previous speedrun, and it's called a switch statement. So what switch does is it takes in an input, say word.charat I, that's perfectly fine, and it will check if this is equal to a number of things. So we can say if this is equal to A, then we want to run some code. Say we want to print it, right? System.out.print A. Otherwise, if it's like, say, E, case E, and then the same thing here. We want to print E, and the same for I, O, and U. And this just makes our code much neater and much more readable than that long if statement that we had earlier. So these switch statement and the if statement are the two ways of checking if something is correct in Java. So if we run this code, it should work. Oops. I think I'm coding too much Python. Okay, if we put our input, howdy ho again. Why is it printing use? That is interesting. I think I may need to put curly brackets around these. let me just check that. Oh, and right, sorry, after each of these we need to break the switch statement, technically. Let's test this again. Put howdy ho. Howdy ho. Oh. And now it works. Sorry about that, but so that's how you use a switch statement in Java. And so now it should work. And we can now move on to the final problem. Right. So our final problem is using a for loop. So we're getting a double, which, as you remember, is a decimal number that's greater than 0. We want to determine whether the integer variable is prime or not. If the number is prime, print out prime, and if it's not, print out not prime. Keep in mind that 1 is not a prime number. Okay. So there's a very simple way to check for whether a number is a prime number or not. And it is a prime number, or it's not a prime number if it's divisible by any other number other than 1 and itself. So we want to check for that. So we can loop through every number between 1 and the number we're given and check if it's prime. So for int I is equals 2, because we want it to start at 2 and then loop through every number higher than that. I is less than max, I plus plus. Now we want to check if the integer is divisible by, if max is divisible by the current integer. So if max modulo the ri is equal to 0, which checks if it's divisible, then we want to print not prime. Otherwise, we want to print prime. So we can check whether this variable is prime or not prime by putting a boolean at the very start. So boolean is prime, and let's set this to true. But if our for loop finds a number that does divide max, then we want to set is prime equals false. And we also want to break out of the for loop. So what's a break? Sorry, I used it earlier in the switch statements, but I didn't explain it. A break exits the currently running loop. So if we're running a for loop and we put break, it means stop running the for loop and just skip to the code below it. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So finally, if is prime was true, so if is prime was true, then we want to print the number is prime. So we want to print system.out.print prime. Otherwise, we want to print not prime. .print not prime. Okay, so if we run this code and we put 100, we get not prime. Or if we put a prime number like 17, then we get that it's prime. Let's also just check that if we put in 1, we get not prime, which we should. Ooh, it's giving us prime, I see. So, So I think we need to make a special case for if it was 1. So let's put here if max equals 1, then we want to print not prime. Or actually max equals 1 or not is prime. So the exclamation mark in Java means not. So this is checking if it's not is if is prime is false. So with other so if max was 1 or if is prime is false, then we want to print not prime. Otherwise we want to print prime. Let's run it and test it for 1 again. And as you can see, 1 is now not prime. So there's a small hint over here that we can use the following to find the square root of a number, which we may or may not use. And the reason you would use this is you don't actually have to loop through every integer until the number. You only have to loop through every integer until the square root of the number. Because if a number is divisible by something higher than its square root, then it should be also divisible by something lower than its square root, because you would multiply those together to get the number. So we can change this to math.square root max. And if we run this code again and put in, say, our test number like 63, 64, we can see that it's not prime. And so this code is working perfectly. So yeah, while we're waiting for this code to execute, that's the end of this REPL speedrun. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did enjoy it, please leave a comment and like this video, and make sure to subscribe to keep on seeing more episodes of the speedrun and to support more awesome coding content. See you then!